Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's lecture in POS 201, Introduction to Politics. Today we're going to introduce global politics. We're going to shift from comparative politics now to our unit on international relations or global politics. So when we talk about global politics, what we're talking about is the distribution and utilization of power and resources on a worldwide basis. Okay, so it's the distribution and utilization of power and resources on a worldwide basis. We're looking at political questions, but we're looking at political questions across the entire globe. Okay, these considerations often include questions of right and wrong, what is just and what is unjust. Nations attempt to answer these types of questions, and it often leads them into disagreement and warfare. So one of the fundamental questions of global politics is how do we resolve these types of questions? What is right? What is wrong? Who gets what? When, where, and how? How do we resolve these questions without having to resort to violence and warfare? And of course, this is even more critical with the development of nuclear weapons in the 20th century. So one thing that's important to think about in global politics is what we describe as security. What is security? What are security issues? Security includes security includes trying to protect oneself or one's nation from physical threats such as military action. We can talk about military action. We can talk about nuclear and conventional weapons, and we can also talk about terrorist networks. So when we think of security, we often think of these types of scenarios and situations. We can also think, however, of a little bit beyond just military threats, and we can also think about food security. Do individuals have access to nutrition, water? Do individuals have access to energy? And of course, we can also consider environmental security. Is the destruction of the environment causing human problems, human security problems? Another important theme in global politics is globalization. Globalization is the ongoing, observable increase in interdependence, integration, and interconnectedness on a global scale, signifying the development of a global culture. Essentially, what that means is that the world is being marked by dramatic increases in trade, capital, and people. These trade is moving across borders, capital flows of money are moving across borders, and so are people. We have immigrants that are moving en masse from one location to another. These have been facilitated by technological advances in communications, transportation, and financial flow, such as, of course, the internet and global media outlets, which inform citizens about what's going on in almost any area of the world instantaneously at any given moment. And a focus on globalization, the scholarly study of globalization, has become increasingly important in the study of global politics since the end of the Cold War. Another important theme in global politics is the dichotomy between ideas and material interests. So in global politics, there's an ongoing debate as to whether we can explain global politics better by focusing on ideas or by focusing on material interests. And when we focus on ideas, scholars who focus on ideas suggest that actors in international politics are committed to abstract notions, abstract ideas, such as, for example, we have a moral obligation to alleviate humanitarian crises. There are other scholars in international relations, however, who suggest that actors in international politics are driven by material interests. Actors in international relations are most concerned with gaining access to material goods such as wealth or power. Globalization is also strongly linked to the idea of economic neoliberalism. When we talk about economic neoliberalism, what we're talking about is a philosophy that suggests that the state should be as far removed from the economy as possible. And this, of course, is an idea. It's the idea that the state should not have a strong role in the economy. The economy should be allowed to be free from state intervention to pursue trade, the free movement of capital, of money, and the free movement of ideas. It's also important to note that globalization, the process of globalization, has had substantial impacts on various cultures across the world. For example, Coke, McDonald's, Starbucks, these brands are present all over the world. Of course, Hollywood movies are distributed all over the world, and some suggest that this has created a homogenized global culture, that global culture is becoming increasingly less diverse and is becoming more and more prone to mimic Western ideas, Western beliefs, Western cultural influences. That, of course, leads to the question of what is culture precisely? Culture is a process through which people organize their group lives, establishing rules and norms of behavior, as well as ways of dealing with their environment. Okay, so culture is essentially how individuals organize the types of rules and norms that they possess together and how they interact with their environment. And the suggestion is that globalization has linked individuals in unprecedented ways, and it's clearly having an impact on culture, on how individuals are organizing their group lives. Another important theme in global politics and globalization is the relationship between globalization and the state. The state has traditionally been the subject of most interest to scholars of global politics because the state is, of course, is viewed as being the institution that creates warfare, that sets economic policies for a country, and it's typically throughout the 20th century, the state has been the most important focus of study. However, with globalization, some scholars suggest that globalization is decreasing the power of the state and that other actors are actually becoming more powerful and are more worthy of study. And such actors include multinational corporations, global civil society organizations like the Red Cross, that cross national boundaries. A lot of scholars now are suggesting that these types of organizations are actually more powerful, are more important than the state, and they are actually challenging the power of the state. And when we talk about the state, we've dealt a lot with this in this course, but we're talking about a distinctive political community with its own set of rules and practices, and which is more or less separate from other such communities. This is how we're going to think of the state in international relations. So states are autonomous. They have their own set of rules and practices, and we can think of states as being separate and distinct from other states in the international community. The United States and Canada are two separate and distinct types of political communities. They each have their own sets of rules and practices, their own laws and cultures. So when we think of the state, it's important to think of various characteristics and important characteristics of the state. The first important characteristic of the state is that states should have a permanent population. We're not looking at nomadic tribes that are moving from place to place hunting. We're talking about political entities, populations that have a permanent presence in one location. They have a defined territory. Again, we have a permanent population that is within one particularly defined territory with clear boundaries. We're looking at a government that maintains effective control of its territory. So again, we have a permanent population that are encompassed by a clear boundary, and we have a functioning government that maintains effective control over that territory. We also have a government that regulates relations with other states. So this government that maintains direct control over a particular population within a territory, it regulates relations with other similar type governments that also maintain territorial control over a population. Okay, and it's the government that regulates, that's in charge of regulating relations with other types of states. So the state is a formally constituted sovereign political structure encompassing people, territory, and institutions. It's important to differentiate the idea of the nation from the state. So the nation is a slightly different concept from the state. The nation refers more to a people than any kind of formal territorial boundaries or institutions. So when we talk about a nation, we're talking about a collective identity grounded in a notion of shared history and culture. So if we think of the nation of the nation that accompanies the United States, we're talking about individuals who share a collective notion of democracy, of living in North America. This is the type of collective identity that we're talking about. It's a nation. So often the claim is that states, those formalized institutions, should more or less reflect nations, so that We have a certain people who have their own collective identity. They should be allowed to form their own political state. And this is the principle of national self-determination. The nation state, then, is a territorial bonded sovereign institution that governs individuals who share a collective history, identity, and culture. Of course, in reality, it's difficult to think of any nation as having any one shared national identity. We can look at the United States as an obvious example of a nation that has a variety of ethnic traditions, of political frameworks, but at the same time, we can also see that the political and so we were discussing this about political culture last week. That even though there's a great deal of variation within the United States and its political culture, that the political culture of the United States is still substantially different from what we might see in Mexico or Canada.